And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D presents us with irresistible conundrums.
Sorry, who am I? I'm Ange, just a 17-year-old kid that stumbled into a D&D game in rural Western New York, and 39 years later suddenly found myself writing articles and doing podcasts about RPGs. Rip Van Angela. There's something in my fuzzy memories about gnomes. Gnome Stew, the Gnome Cast, something along those lines.
Picture this. Liechtenstein becomes the last country in Europe to grant women the right to vote. Australian banks become deregulated. Joe Kittinger becomes the first person to cross the Atlantic solo in a hot air balloon, and I started playing D&D. You can find some of my work at gnomestew.com, as well as more of my work at whatdoiknowjr.com.
After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we'll be talking about mysteries in D&D. Then we'll have some recommendations of D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WD&D the Role Player. Now we're going to Mac McKinney in the morning game with Wolfman. The Assassin's Knot is an AD&D adventure from 1983. It presented a murder mystery for the PCs to solve. Now, it specifically mentions that the adventure may be less challenging due to the resources and abilities available to characters 6th level or higher. It contains a timeline of events that will happen each day, as well as reactions that happen when characters take various actions. You know, Mac, that's not a bad blueprint for a D&D adventure, but it feels a little unwieldy to have a suggested party of 6 to 10 characters of levels 2 to 5. Well, you know, Wolfman, that's just how things were back then. Weird. I mean, weren't you there? You look old enough. Mac, I'm only 28. What happened to you? It was a vampire LARP in college. Those things age you, man. They age you.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Alas, City of Cowls was punted again. Scheduling is the bane of any good game. The GM was sick, having caught the cold his wife brought home from her work trip. And, you know, it's just one of those things that it is what it is. Things keep happening. This is like last year for the Marodi game, where I think it was the last week of September, we realized we were not going to get to play again for the rest of the year. Anyway, the old Margrave did happen. We picked up with them outside of Castle Stephenstore on the Argent River. It was late in the night, and they were planning to break in and rescue Dahlia's friend, Zivona Kilenvi. I had hoped to run this like a skill challenge, but that fell apart pretty quickly. I found that the players weren't engaging unless I specifically called on them. I didn't know when it was my turn. So I said, screw it, and had everyone roll initiative, and that way we had an order to go through and ask people what they were doing. At the hour they were sneaking in, I decided there were only 4 guards on duty. It was like late at night. They don't have clocks, but it's essentially 2 a.m. I rolled a con save for each guard, and 2 of them rolled abysmally, so I decided they fell asleep at their post. The other 2 were awake and alert, 1 on the tower over on the bridge, and 1 patrolling in the courtyard. The plan was for Grish and Mail to go up the tallest tower and sneak in through one of the hatches to go into the area where Zivona was being held. The rest would be outside, and going in with them would be Ovi, Zartath's pseudo-dragon familiar, and Rosh, Nevrim's blink dog familiar. Rosh, though, cannot go up the side of a tower, so he basically had to kind of teleport onto the parapet and get let in through a door. But since he could teleport, they really wanted him with them. Now, Mail rolled a 1 on his first roll to climb the tower, so I gave the guards a chance to hear the sound of him scrambling as he doesn't succeed in climbing the rope up the side of the tower. The courtyard guard got a 17, so he had an idea something was going on, and everyone froze while he looked around, but he didn't see anything. So he went back to patrolling, and they got back to business. Once they were inside the castle, Mail picked the lock on Zivona's cell, and Grish let Rosh into the room. I had them roll stealth checks, and they didn't roll bad. They got a 13 and a 15, but the room next door was where the warden was. So I had him make a perception check. He got a 19. and they rolled well enough that Mal realized that someone was moving in the room next door. Mal told Zafona to stay put and quietly gestured for Grish to let him know that there was movement next door. Mal put himself in a place of ambush in case the warden came in the room. I was planning on having the warden open the door, see Savona still in her cell, yell at her to keep it quiet, and then go back to his room. But for some reason, Grish's player decided that Grish was going to go stand directly in front of the ladder up to the hatch, which was directly in front of the door to the warden's quarters. I asked Grish if he was sure that's what he wanted to do, and he's like, yeah, I'm gesturing for Zafona to come over here and get up the ladder. And I'm like, okay. So fight happened. The warden opened the door, saw Grish standing in front of the ladder, drew his sword, charged in, bellowing about it. Mal ended up getting a sneak attack on him, got a nat 20, did 31 points of damage in one hit. Now, the warden wasn't being quiet, but he was on the other side of the keep from where most of the guards were sleeping. But I still did some rolls to see if anybody noticed. Luckily for the players, the NPC that noticed was Smith, the half-Goliath blacksmith that doesn't really like the warden anyway. So I decided that, as she came in to find out what was going on, followed by the courtyard guard who just kept rolling like gangbusters, she opens a door, looks into the room, sees the warden nearly dead as he's being fought by these two people and a dog, and there's a little fairy dragon flying around, and she's just like, I think the warden is investigating something, calling over her shoulder to the other guards, and then closing the door. We should go check another part of the keep. Now, I did have to have the players make an int check to realize that this was a GTFO moment and not a moment where they were going to get to loot this place blind. I'm like, she's giving you a second to deal with the warden. She is not going to let you rob the place. Warden goes down. They basically figure out how to get out and up. Like, Mal had to go over and open the door for Rosh because Grish had locked it behind him, so the dog was stuck inside the place. So anyway, they get outside. The others that had been outside were doing things to support, like casting fog cloud to cover escapes, putting the bridge guard to sleep when he started noticing things. They weren't just spectators during all of this, but their part was a little more background thing.
Mm-hmm.
All in all, it went pretty well. Even if I got a little frustrated with my players, I still can't believe Grish did that. I'm just like, basically the player just completely missed that the other player was setting and, like trying to set an ambush and trying to stay out of sight, and just, I probably could have pushed a little more, but also you don't want to take away the agency of your players. And if your players are gonna do something dumb, sometimes you let it happen. I don't know. They ended up fleeing into the woods. They ended up camping and chatting with Zafona, who basically decided she was going to go back to Zobek, even though they're like, oh, you can't go back to Zobek. We just killed the warden, and he's a major, he's somebody important in Zobek. And she's like, I am not going to stay away from my hometown. If they want to arrest me for his death, we'll deal with it then. But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm going to go home. You guys do what you want to do. And they're like, okay, fine, you do you. We ended up ending the session with them having a fight with a pair of river trolls as they continued to head towards the village of Incot. And when they finished fighting the river trolls, they found the body of a woman that the trolls had kind of put out on the path as bait. And investigating her, they discovered that, well, yes, the trolls were kind of using her as a snack. They also discovered she was oddly devoid of any blood, and that she had a symbol on a piece of jewelry that almost looked like a chain cuff on her wrist, marking her as a servant of somebody belonging to the Sanguine Path. This just might be foreshadowing for later. Dun, dun, dun.
When you mentioned that scheduling is the bane of D&D, I immediately pictured Tom Hardy going, now you have my permission to schedule. Also, at some point, you have to tell me that the pseudo dragon rides the blink dog into battle, because that has to happen.
Actually, I will say, because what Zartath's player does with Ovi most of the time during combat is have Ovi go sit on somebody's shoulder and do the help action. We refer to Mal and Grish as Ovi's mech suits, as, you know, like he's, or either that, or we joke that he's like Remy the rat, driving them around the battlefield, pulling on their hair underneath their hat.
Nice. Unfortunately, my latest game session didn't happen because when I got back home from being in Pennsylvania for almost a week, Illinois decided to try and kill me. And by that, I mean, there was so much pollen that between my allergies and migraines, I could barely function last week. So there was no game that happened. It's sad, but it's okay because I did nail down the schedule for my Tales of the Valiant Thrones and Bones game, which is going to be this weekend. And then 2 weeks after that, I'm going to have my Chris Estrad game. We're going to be all good. And also, doesn't have to do with fantasy per se, but I do have my X-Men Marvel Multiverse game starting up tomorrow night, which I'm pretty excited about.
Now, you did, you know, this is kind of like payback because the last campaign journal, I think you had all 3 games to talk about.
Yeah,
so,
I did.
Feast or famine.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
Mysteries are a staple of storytelling, often qualifying as their own genre, but also working their way into many other genres. As a result, they also often end up in role-playing games. But just because they often end up in role-playing games doesn't mean that they're easy to run. Today we're going to take a look at how to run mysteries in D&D and other fantasy games. Let's figure out how to do it together, even if you have a full party of diviners. So for our first question, if we're here to explore dungeons and fight dragons, why would we want to throw mysteries into the mix?
Mysteries can come in all shapes and sizes. So even if you're not intending to run a mystery, you're still going to have some situations the PCs need to puzzle out. Why is this ruin here? Who is behind the monsters attacking this village? What does this artifact mean in the prophecy? There's still going to be things that are mysterious that the players are going to want to dig into. And to be honest, there's a lot of content to be mined out of running more traditional mysteries where the PCs have to solve a murder or find out who committed a crime or so on and so forth. It's just, there's a lot of content there. And on another level, it's puzzle solving. And puzzle solving is an aspect of Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't have to be just, you know, a puzzle in the dungeon where you pull a lever on a statue and open a door. No, it can be like, what is going on here? What is going on in this world? Every single Dungeons and Dragons game you've played where you haven't understood why something is happening, that's got a flavor of mystery to it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to me because if you look at like what modern D&D refers to as the 3 pillars, and you talk about like role-playing and exploration, a traditional mystery setup is role-playing and exploration together back and forth all the time.
Yep.
I mean, it really is flowing between those 2 states a lot.
Yeah, very much so.
So why then is it that people get a little concerned that running mysteries is hard when they're playing D&D?
Now, this aspect can happen with any plot you put in front of your players. But sometimes what seems obvious to you as the game master is not clear to the players. And sometimes that can be a little hard to figure out when you're in the middle of the game. When players can't put the clues together to know where to go or what to do, it is incredibly frustrating. So learning how to know what clues to give your players, what help to give them, and information so they can solve the mystery is a learned skill. So it can be difficult to figure that out. Also, let's be fair, rules as written, there isn't a lot in D&D to mitigate the pass-fail issues that come with skill checks, and every newbie GM has run into a situation where they lock the plot behind a door. Maybe figuratively, maybe literally, but if you have problems where failed skill checks don't get the players the needed information, you've just ruined your mystery. And finally, mystery fiction is controlled by one person, both in the narrative and behind the page. You don't have a whole lot of mystery stories where there is a group of people trying to solve the mystery. it's usually Miss Marple or Inspector Clouseau or whatever. It is Benoit Blanc. I love the Knives Out movies, and I'm so excited there's
know.
another one coming.
I know.
Anyway, there's one character that's responsible for, pulling the clues together and figuring out what's going on. Even the shows, like the police procedurals where you've got an ensemble cast, it's still usually that mystery is being solved by one or two characters. It's not being solved by everyone. So mystery fiction doesn't always work well when translated to the ensemble nature of an RPG where you've got a table of 4 to 6 players all needing to play a role in this. Not to mention, when you have an author writing a mystery, they control everything. They know how the clues are going to be found. They know how they're going to get put together. They can do the reveal however they want. Whereas you, as the GM, are setting this all up, and the players have to be the ones to come up with the information to do the reveal.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too, is even when you talk about mysteries that do have multiple protagonists working on them, when you think about that, you think of somebody like Scully and Mulder in X-Files. You do have the idea that this person has this skill set and this person has this skill set, but that's different than having 4 people that have to have 4 different skill sets that all matter to the mystery versus 2 of them.
Yeah, not saying this can't be done, just saying it is a different mindset. So you have to keep that in mind when trying to translate the idea of a mystery from what you see on TV or in a book onto the page.
I also think it's funny that, we started planning this out, and part of it's because one of the games that we're playing in, but as you're talking about getting frustrated over the players not picking up on things, wow, did we experience that from the player's side last night?
Yes, we are helping somebody play test an upcoming game that we'll probably get to talk about later. And it is very mystery focused. And the particular adventure we were play testing, we ran into some, they weren't even speed bumps. They were full on walls of, like, we're not sure what any of this means. We have all these clues, but we still can't put it together. It's not necessarily easy to run mysteries.
And what's really interesting is our GM read through the thing and thought it was going to be easier than all of the other ones that we had been doing because it just seemed very linear to him, which is kind of fascinating. And I've got some other thoughts about that once we get into the rest of this discussion, but it's kind of neat to have that experience right before we have this episode.
Yeah.
So how do mysteries differ from other kinds of adventures that we're going to run at our tables?
Speaking of linear, a lot of other adventures can be a lot more linear. Like you go from this set piece to this set piece to this set piece, and there's your plot and your story. And this isn't to say the players don't have agency through all of this, but the storyline is more straightforward. Anytime you're running a mystery, you have to allow for the players to go where their investigation wants to take them. It's led by what the players want to investigate. Also in D&D and related games, the emphasis is usually on epic stories and grand adventure, and mysteries can often be a lot more smaller and intimate, so that can also be a little more difficult. Like if you know that the big warlord is amassing an army over the mountain and is going to come across the pass in the spring, why are you spending your time solving this little murder in your hometown? It's like it can be juxtaposition of what's going on can be a problem.
I do think, though, especially if you are playing epic fantasy, there are ways to still play those mystery tropes and still get a little bit more of that epic in there. Just thinking about, one of the other things that we had where our fight ended up being in the rafters, where, of course, the villain, once we defeated them, plummeted multiple stories down to the ground, which is not just a haha, I've revealed you and now the cops are going to take you away. It is a much more D&D finish for an adventure.
Yeah.
What kind of components are there to a mystery?
So most of the time a mystery is going to have a strong hook. What about this situation requires the PCs to investigate? Why do they have to be here and investigate? What is the mystery? Why does this need to be solved? Is it justice? Is it safety, i.e., preventing future harm to somebody else? Is this very personal for one of the PCs? Like, what is going on and why does it need to be solved? Also, clues. We'll get into these a little later, but the clues are the beating heart of a mystery. If you don't have clues for your players to find, it's a problem. Also, multiple potential culprits. If there's only one potential culprit, it's not a mystery. It's basically you finding proof to say that guy did it. You do want different potential culprits for people to try and figure out who did this and why. Also, there always needs to be a climactic scene where the truth is revealed, and then maybe some punching happens. It is D&D after all.
Well, I mean, that works because then you just have to think of it as the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies versus the older versions of them, because there's always going to be punching in those.
They were fun. I like those
They
movies.
were. I'm just saying, there's also a lot of punching going on.
Another thing that is a major part of most mystery stories are red herrings. But I am going to say to you again, as we've said in previous episodes, don't bother purposefully including red herrings. Your players will come up with them on their own. All you need to do is put several suspects in front of them, and they will come up with their own red herrings. You don't need to purposefully put red herrings into the game.
I think what helps with that is if you think of an RPG as a collaborative storytelling experience, when you have one author, that one author is going to throw red herrings in there for when you're reading this. If you are collaborating on the story, it is your player's job to throw red herrings into the story. It's tricky because when you are being the impartial arbiter, anytime you do something that is not true, it almost feels like a cheat.
Yeah.
How important is it to know the facts of your mystery before you start playing through it?
This will depend on your style and skill as a GM. There are games out there designed to run a mystery without knowing the solution ahead of time. Brindlewood Bay, I believe Public Access is also in this vein of game. And the idea is that you set up the clue, you set up the scenario, you know what the crime is, and you have the clues, but what the players end up deciding determines who actually did it. There's all sorts of mechanics involved in how it's decided at the end. I'm not comfortable with that style of game, but it is very interesting to see that style of mystery game because it still very much puts forward a mystery game with people solving mysteries. Brindlewood Bay is basically Murder, She Wrote with Golden Girls and Cthulhu. It is a mystery game. I am most comfortable when I know the details of what happened and why, and then I can get flexible with how I give the players the clues to get them to that solution. At the very least, you do need to have established clues that the players can find, because even that is true in games like Brindlewood Bay and Public Access, where you have to basically give your players the clues, and then they can maybe develop what those clues mean as you go.
Yeah, it really is like two opposite directions for approaching the same thing. And I believe, to borrow from another person on the Polygamerist podcast network, Phil has talked about running adventures before and how it really helps him, and what he recommends is knowing exactly what happened. This is why this clue was here, because this person walked to this side of the room and swung a sword and it hit this piece of rock, and that's why this thing chipped off here. And knowing each individual step, knowing the exact things that happened in the mystery, the more you have that all set in your head, when your players ask you a question, it's a lot easier for you to say something that you're not making up, that you're not pulling out of somewhere else that ends up contradicting something else that you're saying.
Yeah, it's all your comfort level. You know, what is your comfort level for how this is going to go? Because I'm a little more like Phil. I need to have the concrete pieces in play, but I'm also a little more flexible about where those clues might be found and how those clues can be given to the players or interpreted by the players, or what they can lead to. I know who did it. I know what's going on, and that's why I can be flexible about how they get there. I've run a lot more mysteries with Tales from the Loop and Vaesen, because those are my con games. So
Mhm.
it's I know what happened, and now it's just the players figuring out how to deal with it.
Since we talked about Powered by the Apocalypse last episode, there's a couple PBTA games that have some interesting mechanics that kind of play into that whole I don't know what the actual mystery is, but I know a lot of interesting details about it. I know in Bedlam Hall, which is sort of a Downton Abbey crossed with Addams Family game, there is a point in there where you can come up with someone else's secret, and if you roll high enough, that is their secret. Like, it is not something that they came up with. And obviously, you're going to play with safety tools. You're going to be able to X out things that are just, no, that is definitely not. But it is a very interesting thing to say, I think this is the thing that you're hiding. And then, making that roll and that being, oh, yeah, I am hiding that. I do have a giant spider stuffed beneath my bed.
And I will say that some of these games are going to be in one of the D&D related communities I'm in on Facebook. Brindlewood Bay came up, and it was discussed how the mystery is solved.
Mhm.
And there was one guy in the comments who just got irate, saying, "That's cheating. That's not fair. It's what do you mean there's no solution to the mystery? Then why the hell are we playing?" And it was like, oh, tell me you're a grognard without saying you're a grognard. I don't care if you're 30 or 60, but basically it's some people are not as satisfied with that type of game.
Mm-hmm.
I have played it. I had a friend run a Bones game where we got to play all of the lab rats from Bones solving a mystery while Bones and Booth were off doing something else. And that was a ton of fun. But I was also like, I don't know that I'm as satisfied with solving the mystery, because the mystery was we decided who did it and then rolled. And if we rolled well enough, that's the solution. I don't know.
Yeah, some of the fun of that is if you come up with too straightforward of a solution, it could be true, but it's not as much fun as if you come up with a reason for why it actually looked like these three other people, and one of them accidentally did help commit the murder, but then it was actually this fourth person that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
That's actually more satisfying than just the whole, it's the creepy looking guy over in the corner. I thought it was him from the start. I'm just going to make a roll and say that's who it was.
Yeah. I will say, just on that note, you don't want to make your actual bad guy. This is probably a whole other topic we could have with how to handle NPCs that are allies or enemies pretending to be allies, or vice versa, all of that. You don't want to have your ultimate bad guy be too obvious from the get-go. You need to balance your NPCs in these things.
The body is completely drained of blood, and there's a guy wearing all black that's extremely pale and has sharp teeth over in the corner.
Going blah, blah.
It wasn't me! So, what complicates running a mystery in a fantasy game?
Magic! So, in D&D alone, there is speak with dead, locate objects, scrying, so on and so forth. And when you introduce magic into a game, it can very easily complicate giving a mystery. The same is actually true for running a superhero game. It wasn't so much a mystery, but I was like, I put a challenge in front of my players, and one of my players is like, yeah, I do this, I get past it. And I'm like, oh crap, I forgot they could do that. And so this big challenge, this thing that was supposed to be a big impediment to them, was suddenly like not even worth it. I once even had my players argue with me for about 45 minutes when I said a swamp was impassable and they needed to go a different route. I was simply doing that as a flavor thing because of reasons, but they're like, no, we can still do this. And I'm just like, why? Why would you waste all your resources to tell me I'm wrong? The other issue with running a mystery in a fantasy game is that modern forensics and philosophies don't exist, and that can sometimes cause problems with your players. Fingerprinting wasn't invented until the end of the 1800s. It wasn't standard practice until much closer to World War II. I like true crime, so I know a lot of stuff about murder, but forensics, as we know them, didn't exist until Prohibition, and all they had to do, all this scientific medical stuff to figure out why people were dying, from the alcohol that the government had decided to secretly poison to stop people from making hooch out of it.
Just like to point out, Ange did just say, I know a lot of things about murder.
I do know a lot of things about murder. I used to joke at work that all my podcasts were either about murder or gaming.
It is funny though, because like if you look at like the early 1930s, late 1930s Batman, the fact that he had a fingerprinting kit was the equivalent of his super high-tech gadgets now. Holy crap, this individual has fingerprinting kits and can analyze fingerprints. This is amazing.
Yeah, there's a
He's
lot
got it in the trunk of his car.
We joke about the CSI effect that happened once that show came on the air and how that changed people's perceptions about the information that should be in a trial. But a lot of this stuff is still very modern. Even the stuff like fingerprinting and all of that. And just, you don't have that in D&D. I suppose you could try and justify having some sort of spell that could tell whose blood that is on the floor, or that it's two different people's blood. But there's a lot of these things we associate with modern crime solving that you have to kind of step away from.
Yeah, it was funny because when you're talking about getting superheroes involved in mysteries and how superpowers can complicate things, I know there's at least one comic with Superman and Batman where Superman shows up and says, hey, I need you to help me with a thing. And Batman's like, but I'm trying to solve this mystery. And then Superman looks through a wall and says, it's over there. Now that that's done, can you help me with this thing?
Yep. Speak with Dead is probably the big one, though.
It is, but I have noticed people fall into a trap with that. And that is, if the person that died didn't see it, they can't tell you about it. So you're not talking to an omniscient spirit. And I think people get that mixed up too, because really it's only supposed to know what the body knew before it died. It doesn't know everything.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of people you could ask, hey, who killed you? And they would not have any idea who it was. But I will say too, this is the thing about all of these things that complicate things, like locate object or speak with dead. You don't want to take away a toy that your players have. I think it is a lot more legitimate to have a corpse say, I don't know who killed me. I just remember this one little detail, because then they still get to use Speak with Dead. On the other hand, if you do this other thing where it's like the corpse was killed in such a way that Speak with Dead doesn't work on it, then it feels like you're just telling the players, hey, I know you picked this ability, but I don't want you to use it ever.
Yeah, it's definitely don't negate the ability. Just find out a way to give them clues through that ability that don't immediately solve the murder.
Are there any mechanics in D&D that make mysteries more challenging?
Skill checks! More seriously, skill checks are the bread and butter of investigation. There are the obvious skills like investigation, insight, perception, but you can also lean into other skills that may not be obviously investigative abilities, but still could be knowledge bases that the players have. And you really do want to have a wide variety of clues so that all the players can engage with the mystery, not just the skill monkey. But on the other side of that coin, D&D and its cousins don't do a good job of encouraging the GMs and the players to think outside the box on how the skills can be used. And there's also that pass-fail binary that can end up causing a lot of problems when it's a crucial clue and the player rolls a 1. The player's going to feel like, oh, I don't get it. And then if the GM gives them the clue anyway, well, is that cheating? What's going on? I didn't earn that. So you really have to be careful how and when you call for skill checks in a mystery.
I also hear a bunch of nerds calling to me from the 70s saying, no, you can't roll dice to know how smart you are. You have to know how to solve a mystery. You have to tell me how you opened the drawer and went through the ledger. How are you actually solving a mystery if you're just rolling dice and having a number tell you that you solved something?
Oh, grognards, just go play OSR games. It's okay. It's your jam. I understand. I want to play a character that is smarter than I am sometimes. I want to play a character that is wiser than I am sometimes. I definitely want to play a character that is more charming than I am. And I would very much like to play my games where I can lean into skills that I as a player do not have. Now, I will say that it is very difficult to play a character that is dumber than I am. I can play a character that's not as wise as I am, but dumber, that's hard because it's really hard to sit there going, I know the answer to this clue. I know what's going on, but this roll an in check in secret. Crap, I rolled a 4, which means I got a 3. Okay, I'm just going to sit here dumb.
Yeah, and I know, like, it can be very satisfying when you can actually think, oh, I am going to check behind this picture. And yes, the key was taped behind this picture. I get that. But at the same time, I think there is plenty of room for someone to say, I am going to look around the room to see if anything is askew, which is still them actively saying something. I am actively doing a thing. This is the thing I am doing. But they don't get super specific and you let them roll versus somebody that after you describe the room immediately says, I'm going to check behind the picture. You don't need to make them roll if they say they're going to check behind the picture, but if they say they're going to look at all the walls, you let them roll and they still did something.
I'm going to share a story. I was playing a game at Gen Con many years ago. What the game was, it doesn't matter. We were in a location that was surrounded by demons. We could not leave the location until we found the MacGuffin. So we were searching for the MacGuffin. We spent, I think, an hour and a half searching for the MacGuffin. And because no one ever said the exact location that the GM had in their notes, that game ground to a standstill. I finally lost it. And I'm like, look, we obviously do not know where it is. We need a little help here. Even though we had said numerous times that we were searching the ladies' bathroom because nobody said they were searching the vent in the ladies' bathroom, we couldn't find the MacGuffin. Don't do that to your players. Do not do that to your players. That's as bad as locking the plot behind a door they can't open because they fail their pick locks roll. You know, if the players are getting close, you can have them roll a perception check. Have them do something. Oh, you notice the grate on the vent is a little askew. You need to play with your players, not against your players.
If you're not going to describe the fighting stance of your villains and then make the players tell you the proper way to engage with that fighting stance before you let them roll for something, don't do that kind of thing to them when they're investigating things. The other thing I was going to say that's funny, I don't know that I can definitively say no one was having fun with this, but in the 70s, yeah, it was a thing where somebody might show up 3 weeks in a row. Each week, they spend 4 hours describing how they're looking through this room, and they never say the one special thing. And that was supposed to be it because the DM knew the one super special way that they had to phrase something. I don't know that anyone had fun with that, but I also know if you go to something like a convention, you do not do that to people.
Don't do that to people. Old school is not generally my jam, but I will play with GMs I trust. The good GMs don't even do that to their players.
Yeah.
You know, they still want you to be clever and engage with the game with your own cleverness, but that doesn't mean they're going to screw you over because you don't think exactly as they do. You and your players are not psychic. You are not telepathic. This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, where sometimes something can seem extremely obvious to you, and your players are missing it by miles. Your players are not you. They're coming at things from a different perspective. Sometimes you need to take a step back and think, how can I reframe this so that they understand what they're seeing?
Yeah. Think how easy it'd be to prep your games, though, if you knew you were going to spend the next 3 weeks just having people sit there and explain that they're investigating a room.
Oh, God. I still sometimes wonder, how did I get addicted to this hobby with some of the ways those games in the 80s were played? I jonesed for playing constantly. And looking back at it now, I'm like, why? Some of those games were awful.
What are some best practices for how to handle clues to progress the mystery?
First off, right up front, let them have the clue. We have talked about Gumshoe before. Probably the best known Gumshoe game is Night's Black Agents, but there's plenty of others. The philosophy in that system is you always give the players the clue. They get the clue, period. The roll gives them additional context or more information. I guess I should clarify. If they have the appropriate skill, they get the clue. Rolling for it, or in the case of a gumshoe game, spending that skill point gives them additional context, more information on what they're looking at. But they still always get the clue, and honestly, that is how I run all mysteries in any game system, because it's not worth it to hide the clues behind stuff. The clue is the heart of the mystery. If they don't get the clues, they don't get to figure things out.
Yeah, and assuming that you don't have a game that was geared up to have the players investigate a cult, and the bard that had the investigative skills drops out of the game and nobody else in the party now has an intelligence of 10 or higher. Assuming that doesn't happen, even if they're not rolling, there is something about giving the clue to the person that took that skill, because it's rewarding them for saying, I want to play this type of character.
I mentioned this before, but you can also treat all skills as knowledge skills. Animal handling lets someone recognize clues related to animals. Athletics, what type of person could have actually gotten into this room through that high window? You can lean into these non-knowledge skills and lean into the expertise of the character that has that skill. It's going to be a little weird, and sometimes players are going to be like, why am I rolling athletics to solve a mystery? What am I doing? Jumping over the body? But it's like you can still roll these things to see if the player understands what they're looking at, because even that barbarian who's dumb as a box of rocks but has a plus 10 in athletics would know, well, yeah, somebody's got to be pretty strong to jump up there and then there, so they're probably gonna at least be this level of athletically fit.
And I mean, there's already a provision that made it into the 2024 rules of D&D as well, that's basically saying sometimes you can let someone roll with a ability score that is not the normal one paired with that skill. And in that case, like if you have the barbarian and, maybe they're not the biggest mental powerhouse, but they have a decent wisdom, let them roll athletics with wisdom. They're not going to blow it out of the water, but they're still going to have a good chance because they're proficient and they have a decent wisdom score. So let them do it.
Yeah.
The other thing I would point out is the poor neglected cousins of skills in D, and that is tool proficiency. Because if you want someone to be able to notice something about, oh, it's this type of weapon, or this particular blacksmith is the one that makes this type of thing, let them roll their tool proficiencies to investigate those things. Because honestly, a lot of tool proficiencies really are knowledge skills. They know how to use those tools and the things that apply to them.
It always comes back to respect the competency of the character. There's a reason these characters are the ones that have been chosen to investigate the mystery. Maybe it's just because those are the characters players brought to the table and it's all you got in front of you. In game, those characters were brought in to solve this mystery for a reason.
Not saying this actually happened, but yeah, sometimes when the intelligent bard drops out, maybe all of the investigations turn into people really intimidating people and scaring them into dropping clues. Maybe that's the route you have to go when no one has an intelligence over 10.
I do think it is worth looking at other games that focus on mysteries to see how they handle things and see what you can take from them and adapt to your game. Even if you're not taking mechanics, understanding how something is done in another game is a great way to build your own skills for any game.
So what do you do when the clues just aren't coming together for the players? Not that we've ever run into this situation last night.
Yeah. Speaking of that, some games allow players to ask for guidance, usually by spending a resource. Victoriana 5th edition, which we may be talking about more of in the future, has aha moments where the group has a certain number of times they can request help. This can end up being a retroactive success on a failed check, a nagging feeling about a clue they missed somewhere else, or additional context about a clue that's already been given. Ultimately, do not let your players flounder for too long. That frustration that happens when they don't know where to go next, they don't know what to do next, They're not sure of what's going on, even though they've been investigating this thing for several hours or several sessions. Don't let them flounder. Give them the nudge to figure out what's going on.
And I keep forgetting about some of these neat little widgets that can come into games that are specifically worthwhile here. But in Tales of the Valiant, one of the things that they actually designed into the downtime is when you do the research action, you actually generate a number of clues. And you can use that the normal way that people research things, kind of the way Xanathar says, like, I learned a useful piece of information about this type of monster. And you learn that information. But you can also just bank your clues and at some point say, do I know anything about this from when I was researching? And then you spend a clue and you get information on the thing. I actually love that. I love the fact that you can build up those clues so that you can just be the scholar that has a reason for being a scholar and it pays off. Does tier or power level affect mysteries? And do they just fall off the table once the players get higher level?
They absolutely do affect it, but that is true for any adventure style. An overland journey is not a challenge to a group that has access to teleport or gate. It doesn't matter how much loving detail you put into that wilderness they need to cross. Your players are going to look at you and like, we're going to gate to the city on the other side of the mountains. You're done. So you always need to keep in mind what the characters are capable of and figure out ways to make the game challenging. That doesn't mean you don't do mysteries. It's just the mysteries are going to be on a larger scale. They're going to involve more powerful suspects or people or whatever. And it just may not be as easy to use magic or skills to pin down what is going on. If you are playing at the epic tier, your mystery needs to be an epic level mystery.
That actually reminds me because, hey, we're getting our comic book references in our quota here, but the limited series that DC did called Final Crisis, which was wild, but that starts off with Green Lantern investigating the murder of several members of the New Gods. So there you're talking about these like cosmic level things and Hal Jordan doing his space cop thing, but having to investigate like, how did this cosmic being get killed and no one knows how it happened and it shouldn't be something that can affect them. And that's how a lot of this kicked off. So yeah, you're expanding that scope into something major when you start that kind of mystery.
Running at higher levels is always going to be more difficult because giving your players a reasonable challenge is hard when they have a ton of stuff they can do. And you as the GM are not always going to remember every ability your players have on their character sheets. So you may think you've come up with a good challenge and then you get it to the table and your players are like, I'm going to do this spell or I'm going to use this ability. And it completely circumvents half of what you put down in front of them. It's something to keep in mind, but it is something you have to keep in mind throughout the entirety of D&D. What is Speak with Dead? Second level? What's Locate Object? Second level?
Yeah.
So this is
third. I think third, but yeah, it's still pretty early.
Yeah, this is stuff players get in that first tier between first and fifth. So even then, you need to keep in mind these things.
And I think D&D has had some interesting mysteries that are a little bit broader in scope like that. I mean, unfortunately, they weren't run this way, but when the Tablets of Fate were stolen in the Avatar Crisis and the Forgotten Realms, you could have played that out much more as this cosmic level mystery. Like, who stole them? Who could have stolen these? It had to be a god, but they were stashed somewhere on Faerun. Where are they? Don't play it out the way it happened in the adventures because it was terrible. But that is a mystery that you could have people investigate. Is there anything else that we can use to make mysteries more awesome in our games?
I highly recommend handouts. Either physical or virtual is a great way to give your players clues. If the clue is going to be something that's written or, physical in some way, give your players that handout. Your players love getting those little widgets of things and they can put them out. They can make their own murder board. Players love murder boards. Maybe that's just me, but it's really cool to have those things that the players can physically engage with and think about and figure out how to put together to solve the mystery. It's not necessary, but it is cool.
Mm-hmm. There were a few like Paizo Adventure Paths that had like a mystery element to them, and that's part of why I really like getting the PDFs, because I would print out a lot of things that were handouts to make sure you have this physical
Mhm.
copy of things. And since we're still venting about old school play here, I was at tables where someone would say, "Can you read that thing back to me again?" No, I read it once. You should have written it all down.
Oh, it would hurt them so much.
It's your job to have listened to me the one time I read it out loud. As a GM, I don't want to do that to anyone. If I give you a riddle that is meant to be a clue to either solve a mystery or to get past a puzzle, I want you to have the stuff that I gave you. And it's a lot easier to make that handout and give it to somebody than to flip back in the book and read it to them every time they ask you what it was again. I know Chris does this a lot in our games, and I really like it. Just the idea that, and we already talked about just giving people the clue, but I do just love that tiered thing where it's like, you rolled over a 30, so I am going to give you all of this extra stuff. You got the clue. You're always going to get the clue, but I want you to feel good for rolling a 30 too.
Yeah, you really want to reward players for those
Mhm.
big rolls, those massive successes.
I do also think it's worthwhile to give them stuff related to the mystery that may not necessarily make it easier to solve the mystery, but might make it easier for them to deal with whatever's at the end of the mystery. Like, hey, wow, we also found this dragon slaying sword when we found out that it's actually a shape change dragon that's causing all of the murders around this town. I wonder if this will be useful.
I don't know. Maybe.
So I think we may have solved the mystery of how to run mysteries in D&D.
We've solved the mystery. Mysteries are fun. Give them a try. They really are fun. I love doing mysteries.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to you, our listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. First, though, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon, so if you like us, you should help us do this show. Provide additional content for you. We would love it if you would join our Patreon. We've got our very own Discord, and we release additional content regularly. Most recently, we've released the playtest rules for Streets of Avalon and Jared's Defiling rules.
Agonizing blast. Oh, sorry.
You can find our Patreon at www.patreon.com/Thac0WA. And, you know, our Discord's also out there too. So find it. Come talk to us. We want to know what you think. So for me this week, Solasta 2 has a free demo available to download and play. If you listen to us for any length of time, you already know that Jared and I have both played Solasta extensively. It's a turn-based fantasy video game using 5e SRD rules in their own unique setting. It was a fantastic game that was the best modern D&D interpretation until Baldur's Gate 3 got released. Anyway, Solasta 2 is on the way. It will be using the 2024 version of the 5e SRD, and they have released a demo that's about 2 to 3 hours of play, letting you see what the graphics are like, engaging with how the game will play. You do play a pre-made party, so you don't get to engage with the character creator, but you do see quite a bit of how the game works. I am quite excited, and the graphics are a dramatic step up from what they had before. It is still a small studio game compared to other games that are out there, and I like supporting smaller video game studios because if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's that the best games are coming out of smaller studios like Claire Obscure, Baldur's Gate 3.
I was going to say, Larian was a small studio before it wasn't.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know that they've grown dramatic. I mean, either way.
Well, thankfully, they haven't been bought by a big studio, which then, after buying them, lays off everyone and cancels all the games they're making. So that's a good thing. I did hear, I wish I remembered where I heard this, but I had heard someone confirm that one of the things that got the ill-timed, badly considered SRD debacle rolling was someone looking at Solasta on Steam and getting upset that they weren't getting some of that money.
Yeah,
So
probably.
yeah. And it doesn't surprise me, but it was interesting to hear somebody say, yeah, that is part of what caused this.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, there was also concern from the folks behind Solasta on like, are they even like, there was a period of time where they're like, we're not making any more content because we
Mhm.
don't know that we legally can. So I'm very excited to see that they've come out with a new version of the game. And the demo ended on a cliffhanger.
As much as Ange and I love Shard, I did want to highlight some of the recent projects that Roll20 has been talking about in a video that they released ahead of Roll20Con this year. Roll20Con is this weekend, which means it will be over by the time you are hearing this podcast, but it's okay. They released a video called A New Era of Roll20, and they talked about a whole bunch of their initiatives, some of which are in some form already ready to be used, some of which aren't quite there yet. But there's some neat stuff going on. They have a loot manager, which is going to do something which I know Ansley's going to say, Shard can already do this, but it is basically where you can distribute loot to all of your players without having to have them individually type things into their character sheets.
What, you mean the other players might actually be able to keep track of how much money they actually have?
Maybe. The thing that I thought was very interesting that's kind of related to that is shops. You can actually build a shop in Roll20 and go to that shop and say, these are all the things that are available. The DM doesn't have to get involved. You're just setting this up to there in the shop. They can spend their money. They get those items.
No shopping! No shopping in play. That's brilliant.
It's automated shopping. It's great. It's even better. They are talking about adding pins, which again, it's another thing that if you play Shard, that you already got, but that's okay. But one of the things I thought was really neat is they were talking about having the functionality to grab a handout and drag it to the map and having it become a pin. Which is really neat. They also showed off a thing where you can hide something on the map, and if players come within a certain distance to it, it reveals itself. I really like that too. So there's a lot of neat things that they have going on there. And I will say this again, I don't dislike Roll20. Shard is just so well built just to run 5e D&D.
Yeah, it's no shade. I have my complaints about Roll20, but no shade on Roll20 because they do provide a lot for playing online, and it's worth being grateful for it being out there. It's just D&D is, I'd like it better on Shard.
So I'm going to have that in the show notes where you can go watch that video, A New Era of Roll20. But since Roll20Con is going to be this weekend, you can probably find way more stuff by the time this episode drops. So go look for it. It's on their channel. We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
Under the Lamplight. Under the Lamplight is the Streets of Avalon RPG companion podcast where Brett and Chris talk about the setting and the game. The Streets of Avalon RPG is a low fantasy urban RPG focused on the stories of the people living in a city of classism, corruption, and decay while trying to bring a little light into their lives and the people closest to them.
We've used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you. We hope you'll go exploring with us again when we start our next adventure.